I held the papers in my shaking hands, and there it was, my son Michael's signature at the bottom. The same handwriting I helped guide when he was 7 years old, learning to write his name. Except now, 35 years later, that signature was on documents that transferred my land. The 40 acres I cleared with my own hands, where I built our family home, where I taught him to fish and drive and be a man, straight into his name, while I was recovering from my heart surgery, while I trusted him to handle things for me. My own son didn't steal my land, he legally took it, and somehow, that felt so much worse. If you've ever trusted someone completely, only to discover they were planning your downfall, please stay with me, and if this story touches you, don't forget to like and subscribe. I was sitting at my kitchen table when I found them, the same table I built in 1987, the year we moved into this house. The morning light was coming through the window Margaret used to love, hitting the papers just right so I could see every word clearly, too clearly. I'd been looking for my insurance papers, just routine stuff, you know how it is after surgery, everything's a mess, doctors want this form and that form. I opened the filing cabinet, the one Michael organized for me while I was in the hospital, and there they were, mixed in with the medical bills like they belonged there. Property transfer documents, that's what the header said in bold black letters, and underneath, in smaller print, the legal description of my land. Every acre, every boundary marker, every square foot I'd walked 1,000 times, all of it, transferred from Frank William Henderson, that's me, to Michael James Henderson, my son. I sat back in that chair and felt something cold settle in my chest. Not the kind of cold from my heart problems. This was different. This was the cold you feel when our world starts to crack apart and you can hear it happening. The signature at the bottom was mine. At least, it looked like mine. The same careful cursive my father taught me when I was 8 years old. A man's signature is his word, he used to say. Make it count. But I didn't remember signing these papers. I didn't remember seeing these papers. I'd never signed anything giving away my land to anyone, not even my own son. I picked up the papers with both hands, held them close to the window light. Maybe I was wrong. Maybe I was reading it wrong. After the surgery, they'd told me the medication might make me foggy for a while. Maybe this was something else entirely. But it wasn't. The more I read, the clearer it became. Transfer of ownership, effective immediately. Grantor, Frank W. Henderson. Grantee, Michael J. Henderson. Consideration, $1 in other valuable consideration, $1. My life's work, sold to my son for $1. I set the papers down and looked around my kitchen. Everything was exactly the same as it had been 3 months ago, before the heart attack, before the surgery, before Michael started helping me with things. The coffee mug Margaret bought me for Father's Day 10 years ago, the scratches on the table from when Michael was 12 and thought he could carve his initials without me noticing, the window that looked out over the pond I dug by hand, where I taught that same boy to fish. Nothing had changed, except everything had changed. I tried to remember the last few months. The surgery had been rough. Triple bypass, they called it. I was in the hospital for 2 weeks, then another month of recovery at home. Michael had been so helpful during that time, more helpful than he'd been in years, if I'm being honest. We'd grown apart after Margaret died 5 years ago. He had his own life, his wife Sarah, their busy careers in the Sea 80. I understood. I didn't expect him to drop everything for his old man. But when I got sick, he stepped up. He visited every day in the hospital. He organized my papers. He talked to the doctors when I was too tired to understand what they were saying. He even stayed the night a few times, sleeping in that uncomfortable hospital chair. I remember thinking, maybe we were going to be close again. Maybe my heart attack was a blessing in disguise, bringing my son back to me. He'd asked about the power of attorney. Just for the medical stuff, Dad, he'd said, so I can talk to the doctors, make decisions if you can't. It made sense. I was scared, honestly. Scared I might not make it through the surgery. Scared of leaving loose ends. So I signed the papers he brought. I trusted him. He was my son. But this wasn't medical stuff. This was my land, my home, my life. I got up from the table and walked to the living room window. Outside, I could see the workshop I built 15 years ago. The one where Michael and I had worked together on weekends when he was in high school, where I taught him to use a table saw, to measure twice and cut once, where we built the treehouse that still sits in the old oak by the pond. I could see the garden Margaret had loved, now overgrown because I hadn't been able to tend it since she died. I could see the fence line I'd walked every morning for 20 years, checking for damage, keeping everything in good repair. All of it belonged to Michael now. According to these papers, I was standing in my son's house, looking at my son's land. I went back to the kitchen and read the papers again. The date on the transfer was from 2 months ago. I was still in recovery then, still weak, still taking pain medication that made everything fuzzy, but not that fuzzy. I would have remembered signing away my home. There was a notary stamp at the bottom. Helen Morrison, Notary Public. I knew Helen. She worked at the bank in town. She'd notarized papers for me before. She would have made sure I understood what I was signing. She would have asked questions if something seemed wrong, unless she didn't see me sign them at all. The thought hit me like a physical blow. I actually put my hand on the table to steady myself. Could Michael have forged my signature? His own father's signature? I looked at that signature again. It looked right, but something felt wrong about it. Too perfect, maybe. Too careful. When I sign papers normally, there are little quirks, little imperfections that come from decades of habit. This signature looked like someone had practiced it. Someone who knew my handwriting well enough to copy it, but not well enough to make it completely natural. My hands were shaking again. I realized I'd been holding my breath. I needed to call Michael. There had to be an explanation. Maybe this was some kind of estate planning thing I'd forgotten about. Maybe the power of attorney gave him the right to do this kind of transfer. Maybe I was wrong about the whole thing. I picked up the phone and dialed his number. It rang 3 times before he answered. "Hey, Dad, how are you feeling today?" His voice sounded normal, casual, like nothing had happened, like he hadn't just stolen everything I'd worked for my entire life. "Michael," I said, and I could hear my voice shaking. "I need to ask you about some papers I found." There was a pause. Just a second, but I caught it. "What papers, Dad?" "The property transfer, the papers that put my land in your name." Another pause, longer this time. "Dad, we talked about this, don't you remember?" But I did remember. I remembered everything we'd talked about in the last 3 months, and we had never, not once, talked about transferring my property to him. "No, Michael, we never talked about this. I never signed these papers." "Dad." His voice changed, became patient in a way that made my stomach turn. "The way you talk to a child who's being difficult. You're still recovering. The doctor said the medication might affect your memory for a while. You signed those papers because you wanted to make sure everything was taken care of. You wanted to make sure I could help you." I was quiet for a long moment, staring at that signature on the papers. My signature, or something that looked like it. "Help me with what, Michael?" "With managing everything. The property, the taxes, the maintenance. Dad, you're 67 years old and you just had major heart surgery. You can't handle all this by yourself anymore." The way he said it, so matter-of-fact, so reasonable, like he was explaining something obvious to someone too slow to understand. "I want to see Helen Morrison," I said finally. "The notary who stamped these papers. I want to ask her about it." "Dad, what's the point? It's done. The lawyer said everything is legal." "What lawyers? I never talked to any lawyers." "My lawyers. The ones who handled the transfer. Dad, you need to trust me. I'm doing this for your own good." And that's when I knew. Not suspected, not wondered, but knew with absolute certainty. My son had stolen my land, not with a gun or a break-in or a mugging. He'd stolen it with papers and signatures and legal language. He'd stolen it while I was weak and scared and trusting him to take care of me. He'd stolen it, and he was going to let me believe I was losing my mind rather than admit what he'd done. I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. I sat there in my kitchen for a long time after that, holding those papers, looking out at the land that wasn't mine anymore. The sun was getting lower, throwing long shadows across the yard. In a few hours, it would be dark, and I'd still be sitting in what used to be my house, on what used to be my land, trying to figure out how my own son had erased me so completely. The worst part wasn't the betrayal, though that cut deep enough. The worst part was how easy it had been for him, how completely he'd fooled me, how he'd used my love for him, my trust in him, my gratitude for his help, to take everything I'd built. I folded the papers carefully and put them back in the filing cabinet. Tomorrow, I'd start making some calls. Tonight, I'd sit in my kitchen and try to remember when I'd lost my son. Because somewhere along the way, the boy I'd raised had disappeared, and the man who took his place was a stranger who saw me as nothing more than an obstacle to overcome. The kitchen felt different now, still familiar, still mine in every way that mattered, but legally, officially, it belonged to someone else. Someone who'd never built these walls or painted these rooms or sat at this table sharing breakfast with the woman he loved. I looked at my hands, the same hands that had built this house, raised this son, signed that power of attorney with complete trust. These hands that apparently signed papers I couldn't remember signing. Tomorrow, I'd find out what really happened. Tonight, I'd sit in the gathering darkness and face the truth I'd been trying to avoid all evening. My son didn't just take my land. He took my history, my security, my faith in the one person I thought would never hurt me, and somehow, that hurt more than the heart attack ever did. I didn't sleep that night. How could I? Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those papers. My signature that wasn't my signature. My son's name where mine should have been. I got up 3 times to check the filing cabinet to make sure I hadn't dreamed the whole thing. But the papers were real, the transfer was real, and in the morning I'd have to figure out what to do about it. I made coffee before dawn and sat at the kitchen table, watching the sun come up over land that didn't belong to me anymore. I kept thinking about that phone call, about the way Michael's voice had changed when I asked him about the papers, the patience in his tone, like he was talking to someone who couldn't understand simple things. By 7 o'clock, I couldn't wait any longer. I picked up the phone and called him again. "Dad, it's pretty early." His voice was groggy, irritated. "I need to understand what happened, Michael. I need you to explain this to me." I heard him sigh, heard movement in the background. Sarah's voice, muffled, asking who was calling so early. "Dad, can we talk about this later? I've got a big presentation today, and Sarah has that conference call with New York." "No, we need to talk about this now." Another sigh, longer this time. "Hold on." I heard him talking to Sarah, telling her he'd be a few minutes. Then footsteps, a door closing. "Okay, Dad. What exactly do you want to know?" The question caught me off guard. What did I want to know? Everything. How he'd done it. Why he'd done it. When he'd decided his father was too old and stupid to own his own home. I want to know when I signed those papers. I want to know why I don't remember it. And I want to know why you think you have the right to take my property without telling me. "I didn't take anything, Dad. You gave it to me. You signed the papers because you wanted to make sure everything was protected." "Protected from what?" "From you making bad decisions, from you getting confused and doing something that would hurt both of us." The words hit me like a slap. Bad decisions? Confused? Michael, I built everything you just took. I managed this property for 26 years without any help from you. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. Your memory isn't what it used to be. Even before the surgery, you were forgetting things. Small things at first, but they were adding up. I felt something cold in my chest again, but this time it was anger. "What the... Ings? Tell me what things I forgot." "Last Christmas you forgot that Sarah is allergic to shellfish. You made that big seafood dinner, and she had to pretend to eat it so she wouldn't hurt your feelings." "That's not forgetting, Michael. I didn't know she was allergic to shellfish because no one ever told me she was allergic to shellfish. We told you, multiple times." "When? When did you tell me?" "Dad, this is exactly what I'm talking about. You don't remember conversations we've had. You don't remember things we've discussed." I was quiet for a moment, trying to think. Had we talked about Sarah's allergies? Maybe we had. Maybe I was forgetting things. The surgery, the medication, the stress of losing Margaret. Maybe my mind wasn't as sharp as it used to be. But no, I would have remembered giving away my land. That's not something you forget, no matter how confused you are. "Even if I was having memory problems," I said finally, "that doesn't give you the right to steal my property." "I didn't steal anything." His voice was getting colder now, more impatient. "I protected our family assets from being lost because you're too proud to admit you need help." "Our family assets? This is my land, Michael. I bought it. I cleared it. I built on it. And now it's protected. Now it can't be lost because you forgot to pay taxes or decided to sell it to some scammer who talks you into a bad deal. I've never missed a tax payment in my life, and I'm not some confused old man who falls for scams. Dad, you fell for that telemarketer last month. You almost gave them your social security number. I hung up on them. I called you to warn you about the scam, after you'd already given them your address and your full name. I felt like I was drowning. Every word I said, he had an answer for. Every memory I had, he had a different version. Was I losing my mind? Was I the confused? That old man he was describing? Michael, I said, and I could hear my voice getting weaker. Even if everything you're saying is true, even if I am having problems, this is still my home. This is still my life. You can't just erase me. I'm not erasing you, Dad. I'm taking care of you. The property is in my name now, but you can live here as long as you want. Nothing has to change. Everything has changed. You own my home now. I own the paperwork. You still live here. You still take care of the place. The only difference is that now I can help you make important decisions. What if I want to sell? Why would you want to sell? That's not the point. What if I do? Dad, you're not going to sell. This is your home. But what if I wanted to? A long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was different, harder. Then we'd have to discuss it, because it's not just your decision anymore. And there it was. The truth underneath all the talk about protection and help and family assets. My home wasn't my home anymore. My decisions weren't my decisions anymore. I was living in my son's house, at his permission, under his control. You stole my life, I said quietly. I saved it. Dad, you're 67 years old. You just had major heart surgery. You're living alone on 40 acres, trying to maintain a property that's too big for you to handle. What happens when you have another heart attack? What happens when you fall and can't get up? What happens when you really do forget to pay the taxes or forget to renew the insurance? Then I deal with it, like I've been dealing with things my whole life. You can't deal with it anymore. You're not strong enough. I'm strong enough to know when I've been robbed. Jesus, Dad. I'm trying to help you, and you're acting like I'm some kind of criminal. Are you? Are you a criminal, Michael? Another long pause. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, controlled. The lawyers say everything was done legally. The papers are all in order. You signed it. Sign them willingly, with proper witnesses and notary service. If you want to fight it, you're welcome to try, but you won't win. Because you made sure I wouldn't win. Because the law is on my side. Because I have documentation showing that you transferred the property voluntarily. Because I have witnesses who will testify that you were competent when you signed. What witnesses? I don't remember any witnesses. Dad, your memory... Stop saying that. Stop telling me I don't remember things. I remember everything that matters, and I remember never agreeing to give you my land. Then prove it. Go to court. Fight me. Spend whatever savings you have left on lawyers and see how far you get. The cruelty in his voice was breathtaking. This wasn't the son I'd raised. This wasn't the boy I'd taught to ride a bike and hit a baseball and change his oil. This was a stranger who happened to have my son's voice, my son's face, my son's name. Why? I asked. It came out as barely a whisper. Why would you do this to me? Because someone had to. Because you're too stubborn to admit you need help. Because Mom isn't here anymore to take care of you, and someone has to make sure you don't lose everything. Your mother never would have done this. My mother never would have had to. But she's not here, is she? It's just you and me now, Dad. And one of us has to be the adult. The adult. Like I was a child who needed managing. Like 43 years of being his father, of working and building and providing and teaching meant nothing. Like I was just an obstacle to be managed, a problem to be solved. I want you to transfer it back, I said. I can't do that. Why not? Because you'll just put yourself in danger again. Because next time, there might not be anyone to help you. Next time, I won't trust you to help me. Silence. Long enough that I thought he might have hung up. Dad, he said finally, and his voice was different again, sad almost. I know you're angry. I know this is hard, but someday you'll understand that I did this because I love you. If you loved me, you would have asked me first. If I'd asked you, you would have said no. Exactly. And then what? What happens when you're too old to take care of yourself? What happens when you can't drive anymore, can't cook anymore, can't remember to take your medication? What happens when strangers start showing up, trying to convince you to sell your land for half what it's worth? What happens when you fall down in that workshop and no one finds you for 3 days? I didn't have answers for those questions. I'd been avoiding thinking about them since Margaret died. Getting older, living alone on 40 acres. It wasn't going to get easier, but that didn't give him the right to steal my choices from me. Then we figure it out together, I said. As father and son, you don't just take over my life without telling me. I tried to figure it out with you. I tried to talk to you about getting help, about maybe moving somewhere smaller, about setting up systems so you'd be safer. You shut down every conversation. Because I wasn't ready. Because I'm still able to take care of myself. Are you? Are you really? The question hung in the air between us. Was I? I'd had a heart attack 3 months ago. I was living alone on property that required constant maintenance. I was 67 years old, and some days I felt every year of it. That's my decision to make, I said finally. Not anymore. 2 words. Not anymore. Like a door slamming shut on the life I'd built, the independence I'd earned, the dignity I'd tried to maintain. Michael, please. Please give me back my home. Dad, it's still your home. Nothing has to change. Everything has changed. You own me now. I don't own you. I'm protecting you. From what? From living my own life? From making my own mistakes? From being free? From losing everything? From dying alone? From becoming one of those old men who get taken advantage of because they're too proud to admit they need help? I'd rather lose everything on my own terms than be safe on yours. Well, that's not an option anymore. The finality in his voice was like ice water. This wasn't a negotiation. This wasn't a discussion between father and son. This was a son telling his father how things were going to be from now on. I'm going to fight this, I said. Good luck with that, Dad. I really hope you find some peace with this situation because it's not changing. Michael. But the line was already dead. He'd hung up on me. I sat there holding the phone, listening to the dial tone, trying to process what had just happened. My son had stolen my land, and when I confronted him about it, he'd hung up on me, like I was some annoying salesman, not the man who'd raised him. I put the phone down and looked around my kitchen again. Everything looked the same as it had yesterday, but it felt different, smaller somehow, like the walls were closing in. This wasn't my home anymore. This was Michael's house, and I was just living in it at his permission. When he decided I was too much trouble, too confused, too expensive to maintain, he could ask me to leave, and I'd have no choice but to go. I thought about that conversation, about the cold patience in his voice, about the way he'd dismissed every concern I raised. This wasn't something he'd done impulsively. This wasn't a mistake or a misunderstanding. This was planned, calculated. He'd used my heart attack, my vulnerability, my trust in him to take everything I'd worked for, and he'd convinced himself he was doing it out of love. I got up from the table and walked to the window. Outside, the sun was fully up now, warming the land I'd walked every morning for 26 years, the land that didn't belong to me anymore. Somewhere out there, my son was getting read. For his big presentation, probably, feeling proud of himself for handling his difficult father so efficiently. He'd go to work, have lunch with colleagues, come home to his wife, and tell her how his dad was having a hard time adjusting to the new arrangement. And I'd sit in this kitchen, in this house that wasn't mine, trying to figure out how to get my life back from the person I'd trusted most in the world. The worst part was the doubt he'd planted in my mind. Was I forgetting things? Was my memory failing? Was I really the confused old man he described? I didn't think so. But then again, would I know if I was? I shook my head. That kind of thinking was exactly what he wanted. He wanted me to doubt myself, to question my own memories, to accept that he knew better than I did what was good for me. But I knew one thing for certain. I'd never signed papers giving away my land. Whatever signature was on those documents, it wasn't mine, not really, which meant my son wasn't just controlling and condescending, he was also a thief. After that second phone call, I couldn't stay in the house. The walls felt like they were pressing in on me, and every familiar object seemed to be mocking me. Your coffee mug, but not your kitchen. Your chair, but not your home. Your life, but not your choice. I put on my work boots and walked outside. If nothing else, I could still walk on this land, for now. The morning air was crisp, carrying the smell of the pine trees I'd planted along the property line 15 years ago. They were tall now, mature, casting long shadows across the yard. I'd bought them as saplings, carried them one by one from the truck. dug each hole by hand because I couldn't afford to rent the equipment. Margaret had made me sandwiches and brought me water while I worked, joking that I was trying to reforest the entire county one tree at a time. I walked toward the back 40, following the path I'd worn. Smooth, with 26 years of morning walks. Every step was a memory. Every tree, every rock, every slight rise in the land told a story about the life Margaret and I had built here. This wasn't just property to me. This was the physical manifestation of everything I'd worked for, everything I'd dreamed of, everything I'd promised the woman I loved. I stopped at the pond I dug in 1985. It had taken me 3 weeks, working evenings and weekends with a rented backhoe that kept breaking down. Margaret had been pregnant with Michael then, and she'd sit in the shade, one hand on her belly, watching me move dirt and hit rocks and curse the machine that seemed determined to defeat me. "Why do we need a pond?" she'd asked one evening when I came in covered with mud and exhaustion. "Because I want our son to know how to fish," I'd told her. "I want him to have a place to think, to be quiet, to learn patience." She'd smiled at that. "What if it's a daughter?" "Then I want her to know she can dig her own pond if she wants one." The pond was perfect now. Spring-fed, clear water, surrounded by the cattails and wildflowers that had grown up naturally over the years. I'd stocked it with bass and bluegill, built a small dock where Michael and I had spent countless Saturday mornings when he was young. I sat on that dock now, remembering a 7-year-old boy who'd been so excited to catch his first fish that he'd fallen off the dock trying to reel it in. I'd jumped in after him, fully clothed, and we'd both emerged soaking wet and laughing. Margaret had been furious about our muddy clothes and delighted by our joy. "This is our place," I'd told Michael that day as we sat on the dock, sharing a sandwich while our clothes dried in the sun. "Someday when you're older you can bring your own children here. You can teach them to fish in this pond, in this place we built together." He'd been so proud to be part of building something. Every weekend he'd ask if he could help with the next project. The workshop, the fence, the garden shed, the driveway that took me 2 summers to gravel properly. He'd carry tools, hold boards steady, hand me nails, ask 1,000 questions about why we did things certain ways. "Dad, why do we have to dig the post holes so deep?" "Because we're not building for today, son. We're building for 20 years from now. We're building something that will last." I'd taught him to measure twice and cut once, to check if something was level before moving on to the next step, to take pride in doing work the right way, even if it took longer. "Quality takes time," I'd tell him when he got impatient with a project, "but it's worth it. When you build something right, it lasts, and when it lasts, it becomes part of your legacy." Now he owned that legacy, and I was sitting on a dock that belonged to him, looking at a pond that wasn't mine anymore. I got up and walked toward the workshop, the building I'd constructed in 1993 when Michael was in high school and starting to show real interest in working with his hands. It was a simple structure, 30 by 20 feet, but I'd built it solid. Concrete foundation, proper framing, metal roof that could handle the snow load. Inside, I'd set up workbenches and tool storage, a small wood stove for heat in the winter. Michael and I had built his first car in that workshop, a 1978 Camaro that was more rust than metal when we bought it, but had good bones underneath the decay. We'd spent 2 years working on it together, evenings and weekends, stripping parts, rebuilding the engine, learning how to make something beautiful from something broken. I remembered the night we got it running for the first time. Michael was 16, and he'd been working on the carburetor for weeks, convinced he could get it right if he just kept trying. I'd been ready to call in a professional, but he'd begged for one more chance. When that engine finally turned over and settled into a smooth idle, the look on his face was worth every hour we'd spent in that workshop. Pure joy, pure pride in work well done. "We did it, Dad. We actually did it." "You did it, son. I just handed you tools." He'd hugged me then, something he didn't do much at 16. "Thanks for teaching me. Thanks for being patient with me." That car had run perfectly for the next 4 years, until he sold it to help pay for college. He'd been sad to see it go, but proud that we'd built something valuable together. I opened the workshop door and stepped inside. Everything was still exactly where I'd left it before the heart attack. Tools hung on their proper hooks. Projects sat on the workbenches in various stages of completion. The smell of wood shavings and motor oil and decades of honest work. This was where I'd taught my son to be a man, Not just the technical skills, but the values that went with them. Work hard, take pride in what you build, help your neighbors, keep your word, take care of your family. I'd failed at that last one, apparently. Or maybe I'd succeeded too well. Maybe I'd taught him to take care of his family so thoroughly that he'd decided I needed to be taken care of, whether I wanted it or not. I walked to the back corner where Michael's old toolbox still sat. He'd left it here when he went to college, said he'd pick it up sometime, but never had. Inside were the basic tools I'd bought him for his 16th birthday. Socket set, screwdrivers, pliers, measuring tape. Nothing fancy, but good quality tools that would last a lifetime if properly cared for. I picked up the measuring tape, the same one I'd taught him to use when we were building his treehouse. Measure twice, cut once, I'd said 1,000 times. Take your time, get it right. But he hadn't measured twice before he cut me out of my own life. He'd acted fast while I was weak and trusting, and grateful for his help. He'd cut once, and he'd cut deep. I put the measuring tape back and walked outside, toward the big oak tree where the treehouse still sat. We'd built it when Michael was 10, a simple platform with walls and a roof, but he'd treated it like a castle. He'd spent whole afternoons up there, reading, playing with toy soldiers, just thinking boy thoughts in his own private space. I climbed the ladder we'd built into the trunk, testing each rung to make sure it would hold my weight. The platform was solid as ever, the roof still tight against the weather. I'd built it to last, and it had. Sitting up there, 20 feet off the ground, I could see the entire property. Every acre I'd cleared, every project I'd completed, every dream I'd turned into reality with my own hands. The house where I'd raised my son and buried my wife. The pond where 3 generations of Henderson men had fished together. My father, me, and Michael, back when we all lived in different decades but shared the same values. From up here, I could see the garden where Margaret had grown tomatoes and peppers and flowers. Where she'd taught Michael to pull weeds and plant seeds and be patient while things grew. It was overgrown now, returning to wild, but I could still see the neat rows she'd maintained for 20 years. I could see the fence line I'd walked every morning, checking for damage, keeping the property secure. The driveway I'd graveled and re-graveled and maintained because first impressions matter, because people judge you by how well you take care of what's yours. Except it wasn't mine anymore. From the treehouse I'd built for my son, I was looking at land that belonged to my son. Land he'd taken from me while I was recovering from surgery, while I was trusting him to help me, while I was proud of him for finally acting like the responsible adult I'd tried to raise him to be. The irony was bitter. I'd succeeded in teaching him to be responsible. I just never imagined he'd decide I was the problem he needed to be responsible for solving. I climbed down from the treehouse and walked toward the house, taking the long way past the garden shed, the chicken coop I'd built for Margaret's brief experiment with raising chickens, the compost bins where we'd turned kitchen scraps into rich soil for the garden. Every building on this property had a story. Every improvement represented hours of work, careful planning, money saved and spent wisely. This wasn't just land to me. This was the autobiography of my adult life, written in lumber and concrete and sweat. I stopped at Margaret's garden, now choked with weeds and wild growth. She'd died in the spring 5 years ago, and I'd tried to keep the garden going for a while, but my heart wasn't in it. The garden had been her passion, her art, her way of making something beautiful in the world. Without her hands to tend it, it had returned to nature. Maybe that was appropriate. Maybe that was what she would have wanted. I knelt down and pulled a few weeds from around the rose bush she'd loved most. It was still there, still blooming, still fighting to be beautiful despite the neglect. Like me, I supposed. Still here, still trying, despite everything that had been taken away. When I finally made it back to the house, the sun was high and hot. I'd been walking for hours, revisiting every corner of the property, saying goodbye to a life I'd thought would be mine until I died. I sat on the front porch, the porch I'd screened in 10 years ago so Margaret could sit outside in the evenings without being bothered by mosquitoes. She'd love to watch the sunset from here, love to listen to the birds settling in for the night, love the quiet that came with living far enough from town to hear your own thoughts. "This is paradise," she'd say on summer evenings when we'd sit out here together, watching the day end over our land. "It's what we made it," I'd always reply. "It's what we built together." Now I was sitting alone on a porch that didn't belong to me, watching the sunset over land that wasn't mine. trying to figure out how to rebuild a life that had been stolen from me by the person I'd trusted most. The worst part wasn't the legal theft. The worst part wasn't even the betrayal, though that cut deep enough to leave scars that would never heal. The worst part was the loneliness. Margaret was gone. Michael was worse than gone. He was present but transformed into someone I didn't recognize, someone who saw me as a problem to be managed rather than a father to be loved. I was alone on 40 acres of memories, surrounded by everything I'd built and nothing I owned. But I was still breathing, still thinking, still capable of more than Michael gave me credit for. Tomorrow, I'd start figuring out how to fight back. Tonight, I'd sit on my porch, his porch, and remember what it felt like to be a man who owned his own life. The land remembered my sweat, even if my son had forgotten my worth. And maybe, just maybe, that would be enough to start with. The next morning, I decided to call Tom Mitchell. He lived on the next property over, had been my neighbor for 23 years. Tom was the kind of man who minded his own business, but would help you move a couch or jumpstart your truck without being asked twice. If anyone would give me straight answers about what had been happening while I was recovering, it would be Tom. I caught him in his driveway, working on his old Ford pickup, the same truck he'd been threatening to replace for 10 years but kept nursing along with determination and spare parts. "Frank! Good to see you up and around. How are you feeling?" "Better every day," I told him, which was mostly true. "Tom, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me." He straightened up, wiped his hands on a shop rag, and gave me the kind of look that said he'd been expecting this conversation. "What's on your mind? Has Michael been talking to you about me? About my situation?" Tom was quiet for a long moment, and I could see him wrestling with something. Finally, he sighed and leaned against his truck. "He's been concerned about you, Frank. Asked me to keep an eye on things while you were recovering." "What kind of things?" Another pause. Tom was a good man, but he was also uncomfortable, and that told me everything I needed to know. "He mentioned that you've been having some memory problems. Asked me to let him know if I noticed anything unusual, if you seemed confused, or if you forgot things you shouldn't forget." The words hit me like a physical blow. "What did you tell him?" "The truth. That you seemed fine to me. A little tired after the surgery, but fine. Sharp as you've always been." I felt a small relief, but it was quickly overwhelmed by anger. "How long has he been asking you to spy on me?" "It wasn't spying, Frank. He was worried about you. Said you'd been forgetting things, getting confused about dates and conversations. He just wanted to make sure you were safe." "When did this start? When did he first talk to you about this?" Tom looked uncomfortable again. "Maybe 6 months ago, around Christmas time. He mentioned that you'd been acting a little strange at family gatherings." 6 months ago, long before the heart attack, long before the surgery, Michael had been laying groundwork for this theft for half a year. "Tom, have I ever seemed confused to you? Have I ever forgotten conversations we've had or seemed like I didn't know what was going on?" "No, Frank, never. That's why I was surprised when Michael said you were having problems. You've always been sharp, always remembered everything." "What else did he tell you?" "He said you'd been making some poor financial decisions, that you'd almost fallen for a phone scam, that you'd been talking about selling the property to some developer who'd been bothering you." I felt my anger building. Every word was a lie, but a clever lie, the kind that sounded reasonable, that painted a picture of a declining old man making dangerous mistakes. "Tom, I never talked to any developer. I never almost fell for any phone scam, and I've never in my life made a poor financial decision that wasn't my right to make." I figured as much. "But Frank, Michael seemed really worried. He loves you, you know. He just wants to take care of you." "He took my property, Tom. While I was in the hospital, he transferred my land into his name. Did he mention that when he was asking you to spy on me?" Tom's face went white. "What? No, he—" "Frank, are you sure?" "I have the papers. Legal transfer, dated while I was recovering from surgery. My signature, except I never signed them." Jesus Christ. Tom sat down on his truck's tailgate, looking stunned. "Frank, I had no idea. He made it sound like he was just looking out for you. He was looking out for himself, and he used you to help him do it." We stood in silence for a moment, both of us processing what this meant. Tom had been unknowingly helping my son build a case that I was mentally incompetent. Every conversation, every casual observation, had been ammunition in a war I didn't even know was being fought. "I'm sorry, Frank. I never would have, if I'd known what he was really doing." "You didn't know. He fooled both of us." I left Tom's place feeling worse than when I'd arrived. It wasn't his fault, but knowing that my son had been systematically destroying my reputation in the community made the betrayal feel even more complete. I decided to stop by the post office. Betty Hawkins had been the postmaster for 15 years, knew everyone in the area, heard all the gossip. If Michael had been spreading his story widely, she'd know about it. "Frank Henderson, how are you feeling, honey? We were all so worried about you." "Getting stronger every day, Betty. Listen, I wanted to ask you something. Have you heard any talk about me around town? Any concerns about my health or my mental state?" Her expression changed, became careful. "Well, your son stopped by a few weeks ago. He was asking me to keep an eye on your mail, make sure you weren't getting any suspicious offers or scam letters. He said you'd been having some problems with your memory." My heart sank. Even Betty, who'd known me for 15 years, had been told I was becoming incompetent. "Did he say what kind of problems?" "He mentioned that you'd been forgetting conversations, getting confused about dates. He was worried someone might try to take advantage of you." She paused, studying my face. "Frank, you seem fine to me. Are you having problems?" "No, Betty. I'm not having problems, but my son seems to think I am." She was quiet for a moment, then leaned across the counter. "Frank, I've been doing this job for 15 years. I know when someone is having cognitive problems, and I know when someone is sharp as a tack. You've never shown any signs of confusion or memory loss. Your son seemed genuinely concerned, but, well, you seem perfectly fine to me." "Thank you for saying that. It means more than you know." I left the post office and drove to the bank. If Michael had been spreading his story everywhere else, he'd probably talk to the bank too. And if he had power of attorney, he might have been making financial changes I didn't know about. The conversation with Janet Morrison, the branch manager, was eye-opening in the worst possible way. "Oh, Mr. Henderson, your son said you might be coming in. He explained about your memory issues." My memory issues, like they were a diagnosed medical condition rather than a lie my son had invented. "What exactly did he tell you?" "That you'd been having some confusion about your finances, that you might not remember some of the transactions he'd helped you with while you were recovering from surgery." "What transactions?" She pulled up my account on her computer, and what I saw made my blood run cold. Small withdrawals over the past 3 months. Nothing huge, nothing that would trigger alerts, but a steady pattern of money being taken from my account. "These withdrawals," I said, pointing at the screen. "I didn't authorize these." "Your son has power of attorney, Mr. Henderson. He showed us the paperwork. He explained that you'd asked him to handle some expenses while you were recovering." "What expenses?" "Medical bills," he said. "Some home maintenance issues that needed immediate attention." I looked at the dates. The withdrawals had started while I was still in the hospital, continued through my recovery at home. Hundreds of dollars at a time, adding up to thousands over 3 months. "I want copies of all these transactions," I said. "Of course. Is there a problem?" "Yes. There's a big problem." Janet printed out the records, and I could see she was starting to understand that something wasn't right. The Michael she'd dealt with had been convincing, concerned, handling his father's affairs responsibly, but the man sitting across from her now was clearly competent, clearly angry, and clearly unaware of what had been done in his name. "Mr. Henderson, if there's been some kind of misunderstanding, there's been a theft. My son has been stealing from me while telling everyone I'm too confused to notice." I left the bank with a stack of papers and a growing understanding of just how thoroughly Michael had betrayed me. This wasn't just about the land transfer. He'd been systematically draining my accounts, using his power of attorney to steal money while positioning himself as the responsible son taking care of his declining father. That evening, my sister Mary called. She lived 3 states away, but we talked every few weeks, had stayed close since our parents do. It ended. "Frank, I've been worried about you. Michael called last month and said you were having some problems." Of course he had. "What kind of problems?" "He said you'd been forgetting things, getting confused about conversations you'd had. He was worried about you living alone on all that property." "Mary, I'm fine. My memory is fine. Michael has been lying to people." Lying? Frank, why would he lie about something like that? I told her everything: the property transfer, the forged signature, the systematic theft from my bank accounts, the campaign to convince everyone I was mentally incompetent. She was quiet for a long time after I finished. Frank, are you absolutely sure about this? Michael seemed so concerned, so responsible. I'm sure. And Mary, the fact that you're questioning me right now proves how good he's been at this. He's convinced everyone that I'm the problem. I'm not questioning you, I'm just... This is hard to believe. This isn't the Michael I know. It's not the Michael I raised either, but it's the Michael who stole my life. After I hung up, I sat in my kitchen and tried to process the scope of what my son had done. This wasn't a simple property grab. This was a comprehensive campaign to erase me, to transform me from a competent adult into a problem that needed to be managed. He'd talked to my neighbors, my postmaster, my bank, my sister, probably dozens of other people I hadn't thought to ask yet. He'd created a consistent narrative. Frank Henderson is declining mentally, making poor decisions, needs to be protected from himself. And when the time came to transfer my property, when questions were asked, when signatures were examined, everyone already knew the story. Poor Frank, losing his mind, lucky to have such a responsible son taking care of things. The most diabolical part was how reasonable it all sounded. An older man, living alone, after losing his wife, recovering from major surgery. Of course he might be vulnerable. Of course he might need help. Of course his loving son would step in to protect him. Except none of it was true. I wasn't declining. I wasn't making poor decisions. I wasn't vulnerable to scams or confusion or any of the other problems Michael had invented. But he'd told the story so well, so consistently, with such apparent concern and love that people had believed him. Good people, people who cared about me, had been convinced that I was the problem and Michael was the solution. I looked around my kitchen again, at the home I'd built, the life I'd created, the independence I'd earned, all of it stolen by someone who'd convinced the world he was saving me. Tomorrow I'd start making more calls, talking to more people, trying to understand the full scope of his betrayal. But tonight, I'd sit in this house that didn't belong to me and face a hard truth. My son hadn't just stolen my property and my money. He'd stolen my reputation, my dignity, my standing in the community I'd helped build. He'd turned me into a victim while painting himself as a hero, and until tonight, it had been working perfectly. I spent a sleepless night planning what I'd say to David Peterson, the lawyer whose name was on the property transfer documents. I'd looked him up in the phone book. Peterson Associates, downtown office, specializing in estate planning and elder law. The irony wasn't lost on me. His office was in one of those renovated Victorian houses that lawyers love, all dark wood and leather furniture designed to make you feel like you're in the presence of serious people doing important work. The receptionist was young, professional, probably fresh out of college, and impressed by the certificates and awards covering every wall. "Mr. Henderson, Mr. Peterson can see you now." Peterson was younger than I'd expected, maybe early 40s, with the kind of confident handshake that suggested he was used to being the smartest person in the room. His office was larger than my kitchen, with windows looking out over the courthouse square. "Mr. Henderson, it's good to meet you. How can I help you today?" I sat down across from his massive desk and placed the property transfer documents between us. "I want to know why you think I signed these papers." He glanced at the documents, and I caught something in his expression. Not surprise exactly, but recognition, like he'd been expecting this conversation. "These are the property transfer documents for your land. Yes, you signed them about 2 months ago." "No, I didn't." "Mr. Henderson, I understand this might be confusing for you, but we have proper documentation. The transfer was witnessed and notarized according to state law." The way he said it, "confusing for you," told me everything I needed to know. Michael had briefed him, prepared him for exactly this conversation. "I want to see my copy of these documents, the copy you gave me when I supposedly signed them." Peterson opened a file folder and shuffled through some papers. "I'm sure we sent you copies, but given your recent medical situation..." "Given my recent medical situation, what? You think I lost them? You think I forgot signing away my life's work?" "Mr. Henderson, please understand we were very careful to follow all proper procedures. Your son was concerned about your welfare, and we made sure everything was done legally and ethically." My son was concerned about my welfare, so you helped him steal my property? No one stole anything. This was a voluntary transfer, properly executed with your full knowledge and consent. I leaned forward in my chair. When did I sign these papers? He looked at the documents again. According to our records, March 15th. Where did I sign them? Here, in this office. What was I wearing? The question caught him off guard. I'm sorry? If I was in your office 2 months ago, sign. In the most important documents of my life, you should remember something about me. What was I wearing? What did we talk about? How did I seem? Peterson was quiet for a moment, and I could see him trying to decide how to answer. Mr. Henderson, I meet with many clients. I can't be expected to remember every detail of every meeting. But you can be expected to remember whether someone seemed competent to sign legal documents. You can be expected to remember whether they understood what they were doing. Did I seem confused to you? Did I ask questions? Did I read the documents carefully? You seemed appropriately concerned about your future welfare. Your son explained that you'd been having some health issues, some memory problems, and that you wanted to ensure your assets were protected. Did I say that? Did I tell you I was having memory problems? Another pause, longer this time. Your medical situation was explained to us by your son, who has power of attorney to act on your behalf. Power of attorney for medical decisions, not for property transfers. The power of attorney you signed was quite comprehensive, Mr. Henderson. That was news to me. I remembered signing something in the hospital, but Michael had said it was just for medical decisions, just so he could talk to doctors and handle insurance paperwork. I want to see the power of attorney document. Peterson opened another file and handed me a thick document. As I read through it, my heart sank. The power of attorney I'd signed was indeed comprehensive, giving Michael broad authority over my financial and legal affairs. But I remembered clearly what Michael had told me. Just for the medical stuff, Dad, so I can talk to the doctors. This isn't what I agreed to sign, I said. Mr. Henderson, you signed it voluntarily. We have witnesses. Who witnessed it? Hospital staff, I believe, and your son, of course. I thought back to that day in the hospital. I'd been tired, scared, grateful that Michael was handling things. When he brought me papers to sign, I'd trusted him completely. If he said they were for medical decisions only, I'd believed him. Had I read them carefully? Probably not. Should I have? Absolutely. But when your son brings you documents and tells you they're to help him take care of you while you're sick, you sign them. Did you explain to me what this power of attorney authorized? We always ensure our clients understand what they're signing. That's not what I asked. Did you personally explain to me that this document would allow my son to transfer my property without my knowledge or consent? Peterson was getting uncomfortable now, shifting in his chair, avoiding direct eye contact. The power of attorney was properly executed. Your son used it responsibly to protect your interests. Protect my interests? He stole my land. Mr. Henderson, I understand you're upset, but everything was done legally. Your son was acting within his authority as your attorney in fact. Even if he lied to me about what I was signing? Even if he told me it was just for medical decisions? That's a conversation you'd need to have with your son. I stared at Peterson across his expensive desk, surrounded by his certificates and awards, and realized I was looking at a man who'd helped steal my life and didn't care as long as the paperwork was in order. Did it occur to you to question why a man would sign over his property while he was in the hospital recovering from heart surgery? It occurred to me that a man might want to ensure his assets were protected if something happened to him. Did it occur to you to question why I supposedly wanted to give away my property instead of leaving it to my son in my will? Estate planning can be complicated, Mr. Henderson. There are many reasons why someone might choose to transfer property during their lifetime. Name one that applies to my situation. Peterson Watu. As quiet, and I could see him struggling for an answer. Tax advantages, perhaps. Medicaid planning, asset protection. I don't qualify for Medicaid. I don't have tax problems. What exactly was my property being protected from? Mr. Henderson, I'm not sure what you're trying to accomplish here. The transfer was legal. The documents are properly executed. If you have concerns about your son's actions, you're welcome to seek a second legal opinion, but I can assure you that everything was done correctly. Correctly doesn't mean honestly. I'm not sure what you mean by that. I stood up and gathered the documents from his desk. I mean that you helped my son steal my property by hiding behind legal technicalities. You knew something was wrong, but you did it anyway because the paperwork looked right. Mr. Henderson, I resent the implication. I don't care what you resent. You took advantage of a sick old man and helped his son rob him blind. The fact that you found a legal way to do it doesn't make it right. Peterson stood up too, his professional composure finally cracking. Mr. Henderson, if you continue to make accusations like that, I'll have to ask you to leave. I'm already leaving, but I want you to know something. I may be old, and I may have been trusting, but I'm not stupid. I know what you did, and I know why you did it, and I'm going to make sure other people know too. I walked out of his office and past his impressed young receptionist, feeling angrier than I had since this whole nightmare started. Peterson wasn't just enabling Michael's theft, he was profiting from it. How much had my son paid him to make this legal robbery possible? Outside, I sat in my truck for a long time, trying to process what I'd learned. The power of attorney was real, even if I'd been lied to about its scope. The property transfer was legal, even if I'd never actually consented to it. Peterson was right about one thing. The paperwork was all in order, which meant that legally, I might know. Have any recourse. Michael had been smart, careful, thorough. He'd used my trust against me, lied about the documents I was signing, then used those documents to steal my property in a way that appeared completely legal. I started the truck and drove home slowly, thinking about Peterson's behavior during our conversation. He'd been defensive, evasive, unwilling to make eye contact when discussing the details. He knew something wasn't right about the transaction, but he'd done it anyway. That evening I called Peterson's office and asked to speak with him again. Mr. Henderson, I thought we'd covered everything. I have one more question. When I supposedly signed those transfer documents in your office, was my son present? A pause. Yes, he was there to assist you. To assist me with what? With understanding the documents, with transportation to and from the office, with... Were you talking to me or to him during the meeting? Another pause, longer this time. I spoke with both of you, of course. But who answered the questions? When you asked if I understood what I was signing, who responded? Silence. Mr. Peterson, did I actually say anything during that meeting? Did I ask any questions? Did I express any concerns? Or did my son do all the talking while I sat there like a confused old man who didn't understand what was happening? Mr. Henderson, I don't think this line of questioning is productive. It's productive for me, because I'm starting to think I was never actually in your office. I think my son signed those documents, and you let him do it because he'd convinced you I was too incompetent to sign them myself. That's a very serious accusation, Mr. Henderson. Yes, it is. And if it's true, it means you're not just an enabler, it means you're an accessory to fraud. I hung up before he could respond. I didn't have proof yet, but I was starting. To piece together what had really happened. Michael hadn't just lied to me about the power of attorney. He'd used it to forge my signature on the property transfer. Peterson had been so convinced by Michael's story about his declining father that he'd allowed the transfer to proceed without actually verifying that I was competent to consent. Or maybe Peterson had been in on it from the beginning. Maybe he'd known exactly what was happening and decided the fee was worth compromising his ethics. Either way, I'd been robbed by professionals who'd made it look completely legal, but legal and right weren't the same thing, and if I could prove that fraud had been committed, that I'd been deceived about what I was signing, that signatures had been forged or coerced, then maybe the legal system would care more about justice than paperwork. I had a lot of work to do, but for the first time since I'd found those transfer documents, I felt like I had a plan. Tomorrow I'd start gathering evidence. Tonight I'd sit in this house that didn't belong to me and remember what it felt like to be a man who wouldn't go quietly into the darkness his son had prepared for him. That night, I couldn't sleep. Not because of the anger, though that was there, burning steady and cold in my chest. And not because of the betrayal, though that had carved out a hollow place where my trust used to be. I couldn't sleep because for the first time since I'd found those papers, I had something better than rage or grief. I had a plan. I got up at 3 in the morning and made coffee. Strong coffee, the kind Margaret used to complain about, the kind that would keep me alert for the long day ahead. I sat at my kitchen table, his kitchen table now, I reminded myself, and spread out every document I could find. Bank statements going back 6 months, the property transfer papers, the power of attorney I'd been tricked into signing, insurance policies, tax records, the deed to the property from when I'd bought it 26 years ago, very thing that told the story of my financial life, laid out in neat piles under the kitchen light. If Michael thought he was dealing with a confused old man, he was about to learn otherwise. I might be 67, I might have had heart surgery, but my mind was as sharp as it had ever been, and I was about to use it. I started with the bank statements. At first glance, the withdrawals Michael had made looked reasonable. A few hundred here, a few hundred there, spread out over 3 months. Nothing that would trigger automatic alerts or raise immediate suspicions. But when I added them up, when I looked at the pattern, a different picture emerged. The first withdrawal had been made while I was still in intensive care, barely conscious, certainly not making decisions about paying bills. The amounts had gotten larger as time went on, as if he was testing to see how much he could take without anyone noticing, and the timing was calculated. Withdrawals made on weekdays, during business hours, when he could walk into the bank looking like a responsible son, handling his father's affairs. I made a list of every withdrawal, with dates and amounts. Then I started trying to figure out what they were supposedly for. Medical bills? I called the hospital billing department and confirmed that my insurance had covered everything except a small deductible, which I'd paid myself before the surgery. Home maintenance? I looked around my property and couldn't find any evidence of work that had been done. The only maintenance issues I'd had were a leaky faucet in the guest bathroom and a loose board on the front porch, both things I'd fixed myself after I got home from the hospital. So what had Michael used the money for? I had no idea, but I knew it wasn't for anything related to my care or my property. Next, I examined the power of attorney document more carefully in the file. A harsh light of 3 a.m., with my reading glasses and a magnifying glass, I could see details I'd missed during that emotional conversation with Peterson. The document was dated the day after my surgery. I remembered that day vaguely. I'd been in pain, groggy from medication, scared about my recovery. Michael had visited, had been so kind, so concerned. He'd mentioned some paperwork that needed to be handled, legal stuff that would make things easier if complications arose. Just sign here, Dad. It's just so I can talk to the doctors and handle insurance claims if you're not able to. But the document I was reading now gave him authority over much more than medical decisions. Financial accounts, property transactions, legal matters, essentially everything that mattered in my life. The language was broad, comprehensive, designed to give the holder nearly unlimited power over the grantor's affairs. Had I read it carefully before signing? Honestly, probably not. I'd been scared, grateful for Michael's help, trusting that my son would never mislead me about something so important. When someone you love and trust puts papers in front of you and explains what they're for, you sign them. But now I was reading every word, and I could see how cleverly it had been crafted, broad enough to authorize almost anything, but written in legal language that would be confusing to someone who wasn't a lawyer, someone like me, signing papers in a hospital bed while recovering from major surgery. I set the power of attorney aside and picked up the property transfer documents. These were the smoking gun, the proof of what Michael had really been planning, but as I read through them again, I noticed something I'd missed before. The notary stamp was from Helen Morrison, just as I'd remembered, but the date didn't make sense. According to the documents, I'd signed them on March 15th, in Peterson's office, but I had a doctor's appointment on March 15th, a follow-up visit that was marked clearly on the calendar Margaret had given me years ago, the one where I wrote down every important date. I checked my medical records, the discharge papers from the hospital, the appointment cards the doctors had given me. March 15th was a Wednesday. I'd had a 2 p.m. appointment with my cardiologist, Dr. Richardson. The appointment had lasted an hour, including waiting time and the drive there and back. I'd gotten home around 4 p.m., exhausted from the trip, and had spent the rest of the day resting. When would I have had time to go to Peterson's office to sign property transfer documents? I called Dr. Richardson's office first thing in the morning. Mrs. Patterson, this is Frank Henderson. I have a question about my appointment on March 15th. Of course, Mr. Henderson. How can I help you? I need to confirm the time of that appointment and whether I actually kept it. Let me check. Yes, you were here at 2 p.m. on March 15th. You were right on time, which I remember because you mentioned that punctuality was important to your recovery routine. How long was I there? About 45 minutes. Dr. Richardson wanted to do a thorough follow-up on your surgical sites and discuss your medication schedule. And what time did I leave? According to our records, you checked out at 2:43 p.m. so I'd been at the doctor's office at the exact time I was supposedly signing away my property in Peterson's office across town. Unless I'd learned to be in two places at once, someone was lying about when and where those documents had been signed. I called Peterson's office. I need to clarify something about the March 15th meeting where I supposedly signed property transfer documents. Mr. Henderson, I'm not sure we should be discussing... What time was that meeting? I'd have to check our calendar. Check it. A long pause, the sound of papers shuffling. Our records show a 2 p.m. appointment. At the same time, I was at my cardiologist appointment across town. Silence. There must be some mistake in our records. Yes, there must be, because I wasn't in your office on March 15th. I was never in your office at all. I hung up and added this information to my growing file. Michael and Peterson had made a mistake. They'd scheduled the fictional meeting for the same time as a real appointment that was documented in multiple places. That was the kind of error that could unravel their entire story. But I needed more evidence. I needed to understand exactly how they'd pulled this off, and I needed proof that would stand up in court if it came to that. I drove to the county clerk's office and asked to see Mrs. Henderson. No relation. Just one of those small-town coincidences that made people smile when they met me. Frank, how are you feeling, dear? Better every day, Mrs. Henderson. I need to look at some property records. Of course. What can I help you find? I want to see every document filed related to my property in the last 6 months. She led me to a computer terminal and helped me pull up the records. There it was. The property transfer, filed on March 18th, 3 days after the supposed signing. But there were other documents too. A preliminary title search, filed in February. An application for expedited processing, filed in early March. Michael had been planning this for months, laying the groundwork, making sure everything would go smoothly when the time came. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment decision made during my medical crisis. This was a carefully orchestrated theft that had been in development long before I ever had a heart attack. Mrs. Henderson, is it normal for someone to file all these preliminary documents before actually transferring property? It's not uncommon when someone wants to make sure the process goes quickly, usually when there are tax implications or other time-sensitive issues. What about this expedited processing application? She looked at the screen more carefully. That's interesting. The application says the transfer needs to be completed quickly due to the grantor's declining health and mental capacity. Declining mental capacity. There it was in black and white, filed as an official court document. Michael hadn't just been telling people I was losing my mind. He'd been telling the legal system the same thing. Who filed that application? Let me see. David Peterson, on behalf of Michael Henderson, acting as attorney in fact for Frank Henderson. So Peterson had been involved from the beginning, helping Michael build the legal framework for the theft. They'd created an official record of my supposed mental decline, used it to justify expedited processing, then used forged documents to complete the transfer. I asked for copies of everything and spent the rest of the afternoon studying them. The picture that emerged was of a sophisticated fraud, carefully planned and expertly executed. Michael hadn't just stolen my property. He'd stolen it in a way that would be almost impossible to challenge legally. But almost impossible wasn't the same as impossible. That evening, I sat at my kitchen table, with all my evidence spread out in front of me. Bank records showing suspicious withdrawals, medical records proving I was somewhere else when I supposedly signed the transfer documents, court filings claiming I was mentally incompetent, power of attorney documents I'd been deceived into signing. Individually, none of these things proved fraud, but together they told a story of systematic deception of a son who'd used his father's trust and vulnerability to steal everything he'd worked for. I wasn't going to hire expensive lawyers I couldn't afford. I wasn't going to fight this battle in courtrooms where Peterson's legal expertise would give him every advantage, but I wasn't going to give up either. I was going to do what I'd always done when facing a difficult problem. I was going to use my head, work hard, and refuse to quit until I found a solution. I looked at myself in the bathroom mirror before going to bed. The face looking back wasn't that of a broken old man or a confused victim. It was the face of someone who'd built something from nothing, who'd overcome obstacles before, who'd raised a son and buried a wife and survived a heart attack. It was the face of a man who wasn't going to disappear quietly just because his son thought he should. Tomorrow, I'd start phase 2 of my plan. Tonight, I'd rest easy, knowing that I wasn't helpless, wasn't hopeless, wasn't the confused old fool Michael needed me to be. I was still Frank Henderson. I still had fight left in me, and I was about to remind my son exactly who he was dealing with. The computer had been Michael's idea. "Dad, you need to get connected," he'd said 6 months ago, back when I still thought he was looking out for me. "Email, internet, all that stuff. It'll help you stay in touch with people, especially after Mom's been gone so long." I'd resisted at first. I was 67 years old, and I'd managed my whole life without computers. But Michael had insisted, had even come over one weekend to set everything up and teach me the basics. He'd been so patient, so encouraging. "You'll get the hang of it, Dad, and if you have any problems, I can help you remotely. I set it up so I can access your computer if you need technical support." Remote access. At the time, it had seemed like a thoughtful feature, a way for my son to help me when I got confused by technology. Now I understood it for what it really was, a window into my private communications, a way for Michael to monitor everything I did online. The morning after my conversation with Peterson, I'd been sitting at the computer, trying to figure out how to research property law, when I accidentally clicked on something called email sync. Suddenly, dozens of messages started downloading, messages I'd never seen before, messages that had been automatically copied to some kind of up folder. What I found in those messages made my blood run cold. Email conversations between Michael and his wife Sarah, dating back months before my heart attack. Casual discussions about Dad's situation and what they were going to do about it. "The property is worth at least $400K, Michael had written in February. "Maybe more, depending on development potential. We need to get control of it before he does something stupid." "What if he won't agree to transfer it?" Sarah had replied. "He's getting older. His memory isn't what it used to be. I'm sure we can work something out." I sat there staring at the screen, reading words that transformed my son from a concerned caregiver into a calculating thief. This wasn't about protecting me or ensuring my welfare. This was about money, about getting their hands on my property before I died or became too expensive to maintain. I kept reading. The conversations got more specific as time went on. "I've been talking to people around town," Michael wrote in early March. "Laying the groundwork, Tom Mitchell, Betty at the post office, even Dr. Richardson's staff. Everyone's starting to understand that Dad's having problems. Problems I didn't have. Problems he'd invented to justify what he was planning." "Are you sure this will work?" Sarah wrote back. "Peterson says as long as we have proper power of attorney, the transfer will be straightforward. Dad trusts me completely. He'll sign whatever I put in front of him." My hands were shaking as I scrolled through more messages, planning discussions about which lawyer to use, which story to tell, how to handle potential complications, everything laid out in cold, clinical detail. "What if he figures it out afterward?" Sarah asked in one message. "He won't, and even if he does, what can he do? The transfer will be legal. Peterson's making sure of that. But what if he tries to fight? It? With what money? I'll have control of his finances. Besides, who's going to believe a confused old man over his responsible son who's just trying to take care of him?" There it was, the entire plan, discussed as casually as planning a vacation. Take control of my finances, transfer my property, discredit me if I objected, all wrapped up in the fiction that they were helping me. But the most devastating message was from late March, just after the transfer had been completed. "It's done," Michael wrote. "The property is officially ours. Dad doesn't suspect anything yet. I've got the bank accounts locked down, and Peterson says the transfer is bulletproof." "How much did we get?" Sarah replied. "Everything. The land, the house, even the mineral rights. All transferred for $1, just like Peterson recommended. Clean and legal." "What about Frank?" "What about him? He can live there as long as he's not too much trouble. When he gets too old or too sick to maintain the place, we'll move him somewhere more appropriate and sell the property." Somewhere more appropriate. Like a nursing home. Like a place where confused old men go when their families decide they're too much trouble to care for. I printed out every message, every exchange, every casual discussion of how to steal my life. The printer Margaret had insisted we buy 5 years ago for printing recipes and family photos was now producing evidence of the most heartbreaking betrayal I could imagine. But I wasn't done. If Michael had been careless enough to discuss the theft in emails, what else might he have left behind? I searched through his browsing history, another feature he'd set up to help me troubleshoot problems if the computer got slow. What I found was months of research into elder law, power of attorney regulations, and property transfer procedures. He'd visited dozens of websites about elder abuse, but not to prevent it, to commit it. He'd researched the legal requirements for declaring someone mentally incompetent. He'd looked up average property values in our area. He'd even researched nursing home costs, as if he was already planning where to put me when I became inconvenient. One search history entry made me physically sick: how to forge elderly parent signature legally. The search had led him to articles about broad power of attorney documents, about legal ways to sign on behalf of incapacitated relatives, about protecting assets from confused elderly people who might make poor decisions. Michael hadn't just stolen from me. He'd researched the best ways to do it, studied the legal loopholes, planned every detail to make sure he could take everything while making it look like responsible caregiving. I found bookmarked articles about something called financial abuse of elderly family members. Not articles warning against it, but articles explaining how it was done and how perpetrators avoided prosecution. Michael had used them as a how-to guide. There were saved documents too, draft emails he'd never sent, notes about conversations he'd had with Peterson, even a timeline of when each step of the theft would be implemented. One document was titled Dad's Transition Plan. It laid out phases. Phase 1. Establish narrative of declining mental capacity. Phase 2. Obtain comprehensive power of attorney. Phase 3. Transfer property assets. Phase 4. Consolidate financial control. Phase 5. Arrange appropriate long-term care when necessary. My entire future, planned out by my son like a business acquisition. No consideration of what I wanted, what I needed, what would make me happy. Just a systematic plan to take control of my life and my assets while making it look like compassionate elder care. But the most painful discovery was in a folder labeled Family Communications. Michael had been documenting his conversations with relatives, neighbors, and community members, keeping track of who believed his story about my deck, lining mental state and who might cause problems. Dad's sister Mary is getting suspicious, he'd written in notes from a phone call. Need to be more careful about what I tell her. Maybe limit his contact with family for a while. He'd been planning to isolate me from people who might question what was happening, cut me off from my sister, from friends who knew me well enough to recognize that I wasn't the confused old man he was describing. There were notes about Tom Mitchell, too. Tom doesn't seem convinced that Dad has problems. May need to find more dramatic examples of confusion to share with him. More dramatic examples. Examples he'd have to fabricate since I wasn't actually confused about anything. The document that broke my heart was one titled, Dad's Assets, Current Value. Michael had inventoried everything I owned. The property, the house, my truck, my tools, even Margaret's jewelry. Everything assigned a dollar value. Everything calculated as part of his inheritance that he wasn't willing to wait for. Total estimated value, $485,000, the document concluded. Recommend immediate transfer to protect assets from potential long-term care costs and poor financial decisions. My life's work, reduced to a number on a spreadsheet. 40 years of marriage, 26 years of building and maintaining and improving this property, decades of careful financial management, all of it seen by my son as nothing more than assets to be protected from my own stupidity. I sat back in my chair and tried to process what I'd discovered. This wasn't just theft. This wasn't just betrayal. This was a comprehensive plan to erase me as a person while stealing everything I'd worked for. Michael hadn't made impulsive decisions during my medical crisis. He'd spent months researching, planning, and preparing to rob his own father. He'd studied my vulnerabilities, manipulated my trust, and used my love for him as a weapon against me. The evidence was overwhelming. Email conversations proving conspiracy, internet searches showing premeditation, documents revealing the systematic nature of the theft, notes demonstrating his willingness to isolate me from anyone who might help. But the most damaging evidence was the casualness of it all. These weren't the communications of someone wrestling with a difficult decision or feeling guilty about necessary actions. These were the communications of someone who saw me as a problem to be solved, an obstacle to be removed, a source of assets to be harvested. Michael had discussed stealing my life with the same emotional detachment he might use to discuss selling a used car. I printed everything, every email, every document, every search history entry. The printer ran for over an hour, producing a stack of evidence that told the complete story of how my son had systematically betrayed me. When it was finished, I sat at my kitchen table with hundreds of pages spread out in front of me, the full scope of Michael's deception, documented in his own words, printed in black and white. This wasn't just enough evidence to prove what he'd done, this was enough evidence to destroy him. I could take this to the police, to the district attorney, to adult protective services. I could show the world exactly what kind of man my son really was, exactly how he'd used his father's trust to commit the perfect crime. But looking at all that evidence, all those cold calculations and casual betrayals, I realized something that hurt more than the theft itself. I'd lost my son long before he stole my land. Somewhere along the way, the boy I'd raised had disappeared, replaced by a stranger who saw his own father as nothing more than an inconvenience to be managed and an asset to be acquired. The Michael who'd written these emails, who'd researched ways to steal from elderly parents, who'd planned my future without considering my wishes. That person was a stranger wearing my son's face. Tomorrow, I'd decide what to do with all this evidence. Tonight, I'd sit in this kitchen that didn't belong to me and grieve for the son I'd thought I had, the son who'd never really existed at all. I spent 3 days studying all the evidence, organizing it, making copies, building a case that even the most skeptical investigator couldn't ignore. Michael's own words, his own research, his own planning documents, all of it proving that this wasn't a family misunderstanding or a well-intentioned mistake. This was calculated elder abuse, committed by someone who understood exactly what he was doing and simply didn't care about the harm he was causing. By Friday morning, I had a thick folder of documentation and a clear plan of action. I wasn't going to hire lawyers I couldn't afford, or fight a battle in courtrooms where Peterson's expertise gave him every advantage. I was going to do something Michael hadn't expected. I was going to use the system he'd tried to manipulate against him. My first call was to Adult Protective Services. "I'd like to report financial abuse of an elderly person," I told the intake worker. "Are you calling on behalf of someone else, sir?" "I'm calling on behalf of myself. I'm the victim." The worker, a woman named Jennifer Martinez, listened carefully as I explained the basic facts. Property transferred without consent, forged signatures, systematic theft from bank accounts, all committed by my own son using fraudulent power of attorney documents. "Mr. Henderson, these are very serious allegations. Do you have documentation?" "I have emails between my son and his wife discussing their plan to steal my property. I have internet search records showing he researched how to commit elder fraud. I have bank records showing unauthorized withdrawals. I have medical records proving I wasn't where they claim I was when I supposedly signed the transfer deeds. Documents." There was a pause on the other end of the line. "Mr. Henderson, would you be willing to meet with one of our investigators? I've been waiting for someone to ask me that question." The investigator, Robert Chen, came to my house that afternoon. He was younger than I'd expected, maybe 40, with the kind of careful, professional demeanor that suggested he'd seen every type of family dysfunction imaginable. "Mr. Henderson, I have to ask, are you currently under any kind of medical treatment that might affect your mental capacity?" "Heart medication for my surgery 3 months ago, but my mind is as clear as it's ever been. You can verify that with my doctors if you need to." He spent 2 hours going through my evidence, asking questions, taking notes. When I showed him the emails between Michael and Sarah, his expression darkened. "Mr. Henderson, this appears to show premeditation and conspiracy. Have you considered filing a police report?" "I wanted to talk to your office first. This is elder abuse, isn't it?" "If these allegations are substantiated, yes. This would be financial exploitation of a vulnerable adult, which is a felony in this state." A felony. My son had committed a felony against his own father. Chen took copies of everything and promised to begin an investigation immediately. "We'll need to interview witnesses, verify your medical records, examine the bank transactions. This could take some time." "I've got time. I've got nothing but time now." My next call was to the State Bar Association. Peterson had helped engineer this theft, had allowed documents to be signed under false pretenses, had failed in his duty to ensure his client understood what he was signing. The ethics complaint I filed was detailed and specific: professional misconduct, failure to verify client capacity, participation in fraudulent transactions. I attached copies of memo. Eichel's research into elder fraud, showing that Peterson should have been aware of the warning signs even if he claimed ignorance of the specific conspiracy. Then I called the district attorney's office. The prosecutor who handled elder abuse cases was a woman named Lisa Park, and she agreed to review my evidence. Mr. Henderson, this is one of the most thoroughly documented cases of elder financial abuse I've seen. Usually victims either don't realize what's happening or don't have this kind of evidence. My son thought he was dealing with a confused old man who wouldn't figure out what he'd done. He was wrong. The most difficult call was to my sister Mary. Frank, are you absolutely certain about this? Michael seems so concerned about you. Mary, I'm going to email you copies of some messages Michael wrote to his wife. I want you to read them. Then I want you to tell me if you think he was concerned about my welfare. I sent her the most damning emails, the ones where Michael and Sarah discussed my property value and planned to move me to a nursing home when I became inconvenient. She called back an hour later, crying. Oh, Frank, I'm so sorry. I believed him. He was so convincing. He convinced everyone. That was part of his plan. What can I do to help? Just don't let him convince you that I'm the crazy one when he finds out what I'm doing. Because Michael was going to find out. The investigations would alert him, the official inquiries would reach him, and he'd realize that his confused old father had turned out to be more competent than he'd expected. The call came on Tuesday morning. Dad, what the hell do you think you're doing? His voice was different now, not patient or condescending, angry, frightened. I'm getting my life back, Michael. You filed complaints against me, against Peterson. Dad, do you have any idea what you're doing? I know exactly what I'm doing, just like you knew exactly what you were doing when you stole my property. I didn't steal anything. I protected your assets. I saved you from making mistakes that would have cost you everything. What mistakes? Name one mistake I was making that justified stealing my home. Dad, you're not thinking clearly. These investigators, these prosecutors, they're just trying to make a case where there isn't one. You're being manipulated. I'm being manipulated? Michael, I have copies of your emails. I know about your research into elder fraud. I know about your timeline for taking control of my life. I know about your plans to put me in a nursing home when I become inconvenient. Silence on the other end of the line. You've been reading my private communications? You set up remote access to my computer, remember? You wanted to be able to help me with technical problems. Well, I had a technical problem. I couldn't figure out how my own son had become a thief. Dad, you don't understand the context of those messages. The context where you and Sarah discuss my property value and plan to move me somewhere more appropriate when I'm too much trouble. We were planning for contingencies. We were trying to make sure you'd be taken care of if something happened to you. By stealing everything I own while I'm still alive to watch you do it? We didn't steal anything. Everything was done legally. Legally doesn't mean honestly, Michael. Peterson might have found a legal way to help you rob me, but that doesn't make it right. Dad, please, let's sit down and talk about this. Let's work this out as a family. We're not a family anymore. Families don't steal from each other. Families don't lie to each other. Families don't treat each other like problems to be solved. Dad, I love you. Everything I did was because I love you. If you loved me, you would have talked to me before making decisions about my life. If you loved me, you wouldn't have spread lies about my mental capacity. If you loved me, you wouldn't have planned to put me in a nursing home without asking what I wanted. Dad, you don't love me, Michael. You love my property. You love the money you thought you'd inherit. You love the idea of being the responsible son who takes care of everything. But you don't love me. You don't even know me. That's not true, isn't it? When's the last time you asked me what I wanted? When's the last time you considered that I might have my own plans for my future? When's the last time you treated me like a person instead of a problem? He was quiet for a long moment. Dad, if you pursue this, you're going to destroy our relationship. What relationship? You stole my home. You lied to everyone about my mental state. You planned my future without including me in the conversation. What exactly am I destroying that you haven't already destroyed? You're my father. And you're my son. That should have meant something to you before you decided to rob me. I'm trying to take care of you. By taking away my home? By stealing from my bank accounts? By lying to everyone about my mental capacity? Michael, if this is how you take care of people you love, I'd hate to see how you treat your enemies. Another long pause. Dad, please, don't do this. Think about what you're doing to our family. I didn't do anything to our family. You did. You decided I was too old and stupid to manage my own life. You decided to steal everything I worked for. You decided to treat me like a burden instead of your father. That's not... I never... You never what? Never planned to move me to a nursing home? Never discussed my property value with your wife? Never researched ways to steal from elderly parents? Michael, I have your emails. I have your research history. I know exactly what you thought and what you planned. You're taking everything out of context. What context makes it acceptable to steal from your own father? He couldn't answer that question. We both knew he wasn't an answer. Dad, if you continue with these investigations, I'll fight back. I'll prove that you're not competent to make these decisions. I'll show everyone that you're confused, paranoid, unable to understand what's really happening. And there it was. The threat I'd been expecting. When his manipulation failed, when his lies were exposed, Michael's final strategy was to double down on the fiction that I was mentally incompetent. Good luck with that, son, because the investigators have copies of your emails discussing how to fake evidence of my mental decline. They have copies of your research into elder fraud. They have medical records proving I was competent when you claimed I wasn't. You want to convince people I'm confused? You're going to have to explain why a confused man was smart enough to gather all this evidence against you. Dad. I'm not your dad anymore, Michael. Fathers protect their children, and children honor their parents. We stopped being father and son the day you decided to steal my life. Please don't do this. I already did it. The question now is what happens next. You can cooperate with the investigations, admit what you did, and try to make things right. Or you can keep lying and see how much worse this gets for you. And if I cooperate, if I transfer the property back, then maybe we can salvage some kind of relationship. Maybe I can forgive you for being greedy and stupid. But I'll never forgive you for treating me like I was already dead. Dad, I never... Yes, you did. You treated me like an obstacle to be removed, like a source of assets to be harvested. You discussed my future like I wasn't going to be part of it. You planned to erase me from my own life. I hung up the phone and sat in my kitchen, feeling something I hadn't felt in months. Satisfaction. Not joy, not happiness, but the quiet satisfaction of a man who'd refused to be quietly erased. Michael would fight this, I knew. He'd hire lawyers, claim I was incompetent, try to convince people that his theft had been justified. But he'd be fighting with lawyers who knew their client was guilty, against evidence he'd created himself, in a system that took elder abuse more seriously than he'd realized. 2 weeks later, the phone rang again. Mr. Henderson, this is David Peterson. I think we need to talk. I think we talked enough last time. Mr. Henderson, I'm prepared to recommend that your son return the property to you. I believe there may have been some irregularities in the original transfer. Irregularities. That was lawyer speak for we got caught. What changed your mind, Peterson? New information has come to light that suggests the transfer may not have been properly executed. You mean you finally admitted that I was never in your office? Mr. Henderson, I think it would be in everyone's best interest to resolve this matter quietly. Quietly? You mean sweep it under the rug so no one finds out that you helped my son steal my property? I mean resolve it in a way that protects everyone's interests. My interests were protected when I owned my own home. They stopped being protected when you helped Michael steal it. Peterson was quiet for a moment. What do you want, Mr. Henderson? I want my property back. I want every penny Michael stole from my bank accounts returned with interest. I want him to admit what he did, and I want you to face whatever consequences the state bar thinks you deserve. And in return? In return, I won't pursue criminal charges that could put both of you in prison. It took another month, but eventually the transfer was reversed. Michael signed the property back to me, returned the money he'd stolen, and admitted in writing that he'd exceeded his authority under the power of attorney. Peterson faced disciplinary action from the state bar and agreed to additional oversight of his practice. The day I got my property back, I sat on my front porch and watched the sunset over land that belonged to me again. The same land I'd cleared with my own hands, where I'd built my home, where I'd raised my family, where I planned to live until I died. Michael had called once since the property was returned, a brief, awkward conversation where he'd tried to apologize, and I'd tried to figure out if there was anything left between us worth salvaging. There wasn't. The son I'd raised, the boy I'd taught to fish and build and be a man, was gone. He'd been replaced by someone who saw his father as an asset to be managed rather than a person to be loved. I'd won. I'd gotten my property back, my money back, my independence back, but I'd lost something too, the illusion that the person I'd loved most in the world actually loved me in return. That evening, I went to my workshop and started building something new. A simple project, just a birdhouse for the oak tree by the pond. Nothing fancy, nothing complicated, just something made with my hands in the space that belonged to me. As I worked, I thought about the lesson I'd learned. Sometimes the people who claim to love you the most are the ones who understand you the least. Michael had seen an old man who needed managing. He'd never seen the fighter who'd built everything he tried to steal. I was still here, still building, still proving that I was more than the problem he'd tried to solve. And that, I realized, was enough.